Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to the ACLU of Pennsylvania's all membership webinar. My name is Sarah Johnson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am so fortunate to serve as the Director of Philanthropy for this really great affiliate. I want to start by thanking you all for being with us today. The work we do to advance civil liberties takes all of us, staff, volunteers, clients, community partners, and supporters who are dedicated to fighting for a Pennsylvania that is better for us all. We appreciate all that you do to advance our work, and that includes showing up in these spaces. We always like to take the first few minutes of these calls to provide a broad overview of our organization and the work that we do, especially for those newer to the organization. To that end, the American Civil Liberties Union is a national nonpartisan organization founded over 100 years ago. We do not endorse candidates for office. Here in Pennsylvania, we are a staff of roughly 40. We have offices in Philly, Pittsburgh, and Harrisburg, and have around 40,000 members across the state. Nationwide, that number is approximately 1.75 million members. Our priorities here are decarceration, police reform, and voting rights. Although 70 to 80% of our time will be geared towards these top priority issue areas, the rest of our time is designed for us to remain nimble, to be able to respond to other emerging threats like reproductive rights and our discussion today, LGBTQ&T equality. All of our work incorporates authentic belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity, and racial justice. I continue to be proud of my colleagues who live in this work day in and day out. One of the things that is important to us here at the ACLU of Pennsylvania is increasing the diversity of our organization in every aspect, which includes our membership and supporter base, so that it reflects the world that we not only live in, but the communities we serve in our work. So with our webinars, there's often a broad range of folks who call in. Some of you have been supporting our work for decades. I recognize many of the names in this space, and some of you are new to our work. So we are delighted to have all of you. So again, thank you. I feel especially fortunate to be walking us through this discussion today, as it's a personal one for me. As a queer person who grew up in the 90s in rural middle of nowhere America, it's been a journey to get to my authentic self. A journey that in some ways I am very much still on, still unpacking, unlearning, relearning. I often reflect on how different my walk through life may have been had there been an LGBTQ&T youth center like the Rainbow Room in my community, a teacher who proudly displayed a pride flag, or representation of queer folks in everyday lives and learnings, which I just didn't have. The young people of today have a different experience than I did, but also one riddled with harm and trauma. So today this work is ever more important because it is now. We are here and we can act. And one way in which we can act is showing up. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for joining, and thanks for being a part of our community of action. But fortunately for you all, we are not here to talk about me. We'll hear from a couple of my colleagues and an important community partner in the fight. Before we get started, a few logistics. Shortly, I'll bring our panelists up to the stage, and we'll spend 40 or so minutes to discuss the issues and what we've been up to. At the end, we'll be sure to leave some space for some question and answer time. As an FYI, as you see, this webinar is recorded, so we will plan on posting it as well. So please share the knowledge and guide others in your community towards this session. If you need closed captions, you can enable that feature at the bottom of your screen. It's under live transcript, and we will be utilizing the Q&A function during the call, so please use it. For folks who've dialed in, you can submit your questions, if you like, to our email, donate@aclu-pa.org, and we'll be sure to follow up. And now I will welcome our panelists to the stage. Alex Domingos, Advocacy and Policy Strategist, Rich Ting, Senior Staff Attorney, and Marlene Prey, Director, Founder of the Rainbow Room, which is Bucks County's LGBTQ Youth Center. So welcome panelists. This Pride Month, the ACLU is currently tracking almost 500 anti-LGBTQ&T bills in state legislatures across the country, many of which target transgender, non-binary folks, 3 bills right here in Pennsylvania. So today we'll talk about this work, what it looks like here, and also how the greater community can help. So thank you for the guests in the audience, and we appreciate your time, Rich, Alex, Marlene, for your time and joining us to share your expertise. So I've got a few questions for our panelists, and then again, we'll open it up for Q&A. But before we do there, I invite the panelists to give a quick little introduction of themselves and briefly just their role in the fight. And we'll start with you, Alex.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Alex Domingos, he, him, his pronouns. I'm an advocacy and policy strategist here at the ACLU-PA, based out of the Harrisburg office, and I collaborate with our staff and community partners in terms of advocacy and tracking legislation and policies that get introduced at school boards across the Commonwealth.
How about you, Marlene?
Hello, everybody. My name's Marlene Prey. My pronouns are she, her. I am so proud to be here and to work for Planned Parenthood Keystone. I serve as the director of the Rainbow Room, which is Planned Parenthood Keystone's queer youth center here in Bucks County. And I'm also our agency's LGBTQ youth education outreach coordinator. I'm also a parent in the Central Bucks School District. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Ting. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior staff attorney with the ACLU of Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh office. And I've been doing a lot of work around various different education issues that we're seeing around the state and a lot of the work in Central Bucks School District.
Thank you for all that. I think a great place for us to start is just kind of setting the stage, right? Adding a little context for why we're here and the importance of this work today and why we chose this week to talk about it. So for a little level setting, I guess, all 3 of you, if you'd like to take this one, perhaps we'll start with you, Alex. What kind of challenges are we seeing here in Pennsylvania and where are they happening?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the second part of that question first. They're happening, unfortunately, all across the Commonwealth. Where Marlene is in Bucks County, we're seeing a lot of it happening. That county seems to be an outlier in terms of sort of the breadth and depth of the policies. But we get intakes and we hear from folks really all across PA, from Central PA where I am, Western PA, and out there in Eastern PA as well, to sort of talk about what we're seeing. It's unfortunately a long list of policies. We're seeing bans on trans students participating in sports, bathroom and locker room bills restricting who can access these facilities. We're seeing book bans, changes in curriculum to attack any true accounting of America's history, attacking the very idea of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen stifling of teacher and student and school employee speech, the removal of posters and classroom materials, and targeting teachers for quote unquote advocacy. We've even seen changes in sex ed health classes. And ultimately what all these policies, I would say, amount to is an attack on the very idea of public education, really by using sort of every lever of the school experience to try to push that agenda and inject politics into the everyday lives of students and educators and professionals.
I guess I can follow up to talk about some of the legal issues. And when I talk about legal, we're talking about kind of court action or taking action with a federal agency or state agency. And I'll just start out by saying too that one of the frustrations of the practice of law as a lawyer is that legal action is very reactive. So we have to wait until there's a problem before we can do something, and that's why the work that Alex does and the work that Marlene does in the community is so important, that advocacy policy work to try to kind of prevent the problems from happening in the first place. And in terms of legal threats, I guess, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of legal action, I would say that a couple things that we're seeing is this push for parental rights. I'm sure you kind of hear that being thrown around a lot in discourse, and there is a constitutional right to direct the upbringing and education of children. So that is a real thing. The issue is that it's pretty limited, and it's typically, it protects parents from having the government kind of interfere with what you're doing at home with raising your children. For example, in the past, the Supreme Court struck down a prohibition on teaching German to children. I think this was a post-World War I law that was in place. So that was illegal. Like a school district can say, we're not going to teach German in school, but you can't prohibit parents from teaching their own children German at home. And it's also unconstitutional for a state to say you must attend public school. So the parents have a right to, if you're not happy with public school, you can homeschool your kids, you can send them to private school. So the state cannot say you must send your kids to public school. The issue now is that we're seeing, so there's not a ton of litigation on this, I would say, but there are some cases that are being filed now by parents who are saying, you're interfering with my parental right to direct the upbringing of my child by doing things in school. So now there's this push to try to kind of transform that into a right to control how other kids get taught, which is not something that has ever been recognized. So we're seeing some litigation, some cases percolating about that. And I'd say the other thing that comes up a lot now is there's a increasing push to assert religious rights as a justification for discrimination. So there are more cases about that. They're still kind of percolating through the trial courts, so we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens as those cases progress, if they go up to the appellate courts and eventually the Supreme Court possibly as well.
And I'll just jump in briefly. When I think about what kind of challenges we're seeing and where they're happening, I've been running the Rainbow Room for 21 years since we started with Planned Parenthood here in Bucks County. And only in the last 2 to 3 years have we ever had the level of misinformation, attacks, protesting, and we're pretty used to it at Planned Parenthood. We know what to do, and we're prepared to handle, opposition and protesters. But this has been an unprecedented attack. And so much of what Rich and Alex said, that there's, this justification for discrimination. I love that. I mean, I don't love it. I hate that. But that phrase that you use, Rich, is so accurate. And so when I think about where the challenges are happening, even as I talk to parents across Pennsylvania, and there's been a lot more of that, we feel it and see it in our communities. We see it in student clubs, which are typically protected spaces, where those clubs at public schools are being, parents are interfering more to try and handle what's happening there. And the other thing I really want to say is that when I think about what we've done as, community members and as, someone that runs a queer youth center, we have, of course, evolved and changed with the times and technology and things like that, but we haven't gotten any more like extreme or left or liberal. Like, we are pretty much just still offering medically accurate, age appropriate, empowering education and responding to best practices and trends and terms. And yet the far right has gotten so much more involved. So when people talk about like that there's divisiveness in our nation, I don't think it's about divisiveness. I think it's really about a rise of misinformation, white supremacy, discrimination, anti-queer attacks, and an obsession with anything having to do with children and their genitals, which to me is actually kind of creepy. So I don't actually see that like the community has gotten more divided. I think there has been a rise of attacks by a small, loud percentage of, of folks directed at people's human rights and people's civil rights. So I just wanted to share that as well. Thanks.
No, thank you for all of those perspectives. And from that level, Marlene, in the community level, it's interesting to hear. Long track record, 21 years, but really these last 2 to 3, the extreme uptick, which is a great segue into where I wanted to go next. Why are we seeing those upticks today? I guess you can't necessarily speak to everybody's motivation, but what would you say the motivation behind these attacks on LGBTQ&T people are coming from, especially youth, and why has it escalated so dramatically these last couple of years? I don't know who wants to take that first. Maybe you, Alex.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd say it would be right to look at this as sort of a political project. I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room right now is like, we take a look at what's happening in Philadelphia today, right? Some of that loud, but small group of folks who have been pushing these anti-inclusive policies are gathering. And if you just take a look at some of the voices and platforms that conference is elevating, it sort of gives you an idea of what their motivations are and what kind of political project they're working on. And it seems, based on their actions and public pronouncements, that the idea is to use students, and particularly vulnerable students, to inject politics into schools. I mean, LGBTQ&T people have always been in this country, right? And this country has a fraught history there. But as Marlene so rightly noted, in the past couple of years, especially coming out of COVID, right, we've seen this movement sort of grow, and really the kind of cynical politicization of students and teachers and professionals who have, been doing the same thing for years, but suddenly there's an issue. But yeah, I'd really love to hear from Marlene on this. your perspective, I think, as a parent on the ground and your work with the Rainbow Room, you've sort of seen this coming, like, right, like we depend on community to reach out to us through intake and through our relationships to sort of learn what's happening on the ground, but you've sort of been able to watch it in real time. So I'd love to hear Marlene's perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I mean, I'm glad you brought up what's happening in Philly right now. I also really think about even looking at the January 6th insurrection and this move for Christian nationalism. I think it has empowered a bolder set of attacks and of shamelessness about this work, this attack. We certainly see that people are they're less frightened to be boldly bigoted. And then when they get called out on it, they try to twist it into like, oh, we're protecting girls in sports, when they've never cared about that or fought for that and are not actually fighting for what, girls and women need and want and have been organizing for in athletics for decades. I think about my dissertation research in human sexuality was very much looking at some of the Christian right movement in the 80s and how that they really targeted abortion rights and sex education. That was not actually what their motivators were. Their motivators were maintaining white supremacy, but they picked issues that they felt they could be successful in impacting, more conservative and persuadable people. And we look at some of these like toolkits from the far right and how they have very distinctly, they attacked critical race theory, which is, not even something that most of us recognize that is not a pressing issue or something that's actually underway in our K through 12 schools. But it was very much a reaction to the kind of the rise of DEI work, and that we were, in these emerging phases in our nation of bringing some of these much needed human and civil rights perspectives into making our communities and our schools more successful for everyone. And as there's been a beautiful glowing rise of queer identity and of young people claiming that, there is a backlash to that, and a lot of fear, and a lot of that is really rooted in some pretty violent and devastating perspectives. And some of that we saw play out on a national stage on January 6th, that boldness of attacks and that shamelessness to claim it and be proud of it and then defend it and then lie about it. So I'll just add that. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's move a little bit farther into the discussion. Now that we've talked about what we're seeing and why, and the increase of these threats, let's talk about what we're doing to respond. So from an ACLU-PA perspective, first I'll ask this of you, Alex and Rich. What have we done to protect the freedoms and rights of LGBTQ&T youth lately?
I guess I can start in terms of the legal actions that we've taken. So hopefully people have heard about these, but so back in the fall, we filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, and that was on behalf of 7 students in the Central Bucks School District. They were all transgender or non-binary students that experienced some form of discrimination or harassment or bullying in schools that were not addressed by administration. And the basis of the complaint was a hostile environment for transgender and non-binary students in particular, and perpetuating or failure to address the hostile environment is a form of discrimination that's illegal under Title IX of the Education Amendments, which prohibits sex discrimination in education programs that receive federal funding. So we filed that complaint in the fall. OCR opened an investigation, which is still ongoing. My understanding is they've requested a lot of documents from the school district. and have started interviewing some students and other people in the community. I don't know how long that's going to take. I suspect it may be a pretty long process. In the meantime, we were hopeful that the school board majority would at least kind of pause and maybe kind of reflect a little. And unfortunately, the school board has really kind of doubled down. They hired a law firm to conduct an investigation, which was, I guess we have our own opinions about that, but it was really a legitimate investigation. They issued a report in April, basically saying that there is no problem with anti-LGBTQ&T bullying or harassment in the schools. They even went so far to say it's virtually non-existent. So they pretty much, despite the fact that we filed this complaint on behalf of 7 students, it was a little, well, more than a little disheartening that they just kind of ignored that as if it didn't exist. So that's still ongoing. Like I said, we don't know how long it'll take, but we're hopeful that it will result in some positive change. So what happens is OCR will finish their investigation and then determine whether or not there's a likely violation of law. So whether or not the district illegally discriminated against LGBTQ&T students by failing to address a hostile environment. And if that happens, then they will try to negotiate with the school district for resolution. They may, for example, ask the school district to have training for teachers or implement certain policy changes. If the school district still refuses, at that point, it's possible that US DOJ, the Department of Justice, would then come in to file an enforcement action in federal court, and then they would fight about it in court. There's that, and sort of tangentially related to that, part of that whole story is there was a middle school teacher who tried to help a transgender student who had experienced bullying and harassment. The student had gone to administration and guidance counselor several times to talk about these issues, and kind of felt like nothing had ever improved after reporting things to the school. So that's when the student then went to this teacher for help. The teacher, with the student's mom's permission and actually blessing, filed a complaint with OCR to address the bullying. And then after that happened, the school district suspended the teacher. Various other things happened since then, but we have a pending federal lawsuit on behalf of the teacher for illegal retaliation in violation of the First Amendment and Title IX. So those are the pending legal actions we have open now, and obviously we kind of keep an eye on things that are going on around the state, but in terms of actual legal action, those are the 2 open things we have at the moment.
And I think like pretty much all the issues we work on, right, we understand that it's going to take sort of all the tools that we have available here at ACLU-PA. So advocacy sort of goes hand in hand with Rich and our other colleagues in the legal department's great work. In our department, we've been working closely with community partners like Marlene. We've worked to advise parents, students, and school employees of their rights, and really just support them. I mean, folks on the ground always amaze me with the great work they're doing, right? So we just kind of provide a helping hand, help make connections and share information from what we've learned in other school districts and other partners that we have, and we help connect folks with allied organizations. We've been working to organize ourselves on our side. So there's a statewide table that's formed with other organizations that are working in the space, that have been working in the space for a long time, so that we can, again, share information and collaborate to uplift the great work that's happening on the ground, from just regular everyday parents and student groups that have really taken advocacy into their own hands.
Thank you. What about from a legislation standpoint? What efforts have been made to push legislation in this state? We referenced earlier over 500 anti-LGBTQ Q&T bills across the nation, and 3 of them here in Pennsylvania. So what are they, and what are the implications if these bills, may be passed?
I can start with talking about the Senator Ryan Almond bill. Right now it's HB 1506. It would require schools to create a list of sexually explicit material, and parents and students would be required then to opt in to that material. As is the case with a lot of this legislation, there's no real definition of sexually explicit, right? And the way we fear it would be applied, it would be so broad, such that really any material dealing with LGBTQ&T issues would be deemed sexually explicit, and that's how we've seen these bills sort of be used on the local level. So like, even if you look at Senator Almond's own admission, classics such as Catcher in the Rye or Romeo and Juliet or the Bible would trigger parental notification, right? And permission clauses required by the bill. Librarians who are trained professionals in how to select age appropriate materials would be overruled and sort of micromanaged by this bill. And it ignores the fact that parents already have the ability to opt their child out of checking out certain library books, right? So sort of like Rich was alluding to earlier, this is really an effort. It's not about parental rights. You already have the right to restrict your own child from reading a book you don't like. This is about a parent's right to restrict all children's right to check a book out of the library book, right? And it is in effect a book ban. Even though the bill doesn't explicitly say we are banning these books, besides the super broad and nebulous category of sexually explicit, these bills do cause self-censorship, right? Teachers and librarians are very aware of their own school boards' attacks on LGBTQ&T people and content. They're very aware of the lack of support for students who suffer this bullying, or for them as teachers and professionals trying to support and protect these students. So teachers and librarians, right, will self-censor and will remove books to avoid dealing with the hassle, right? And it would create a situation where you have to create basically parallel curriculums just to try to comply with these bills. So this is a bill we're tracking. We obviously oppose it, but that's one of the issues on the state level. I know a lot of the action is at the local and school board level, and I know Marlene can talk to that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. Just listening to you talk about the self-censoring and the, restrictions and bans on books. As a parent here in the Central Bucks School District, there are literally classrooms that my kid had where all of the books were removed from the teachers in classroom library. There's in classroom libraries. And some of the teachers removed every single book from their shelves just out of fear of I don't know what's allowed or not. And so kids that used to be able to get a book out of their classroom might now have to go to the library, might not want to go to the library, or the library may or may not have that book. So that is a very real, and not to mention just pride flags being gone. And the stress that this also places on teachers is profound. We already have, really a crisis in our country with trying to keep teachers in their jobs, and we hold them up as heroes when they stand in front of bullets, yet we see the far right attacking them as if they are there to harm children. And then when there actually is harm that happens, because harm does happen, it makes it harder to identify and really prioritize the seriousness of that. So the actual local level is, and also just the vitriol, and again, I really want to repeat, it's not that these two sides have gotten more extreme and now we don't get along. It's really that we are still here advocating for civil rights and human rights. And there is a emboldened, loud minority of conspiracy driven, Christian nationalists who have leveraged an attack. And I also really want to point out in the same moment that I say that some of the most profound, important support that we have received as Planned Parenthood Keystone's Rainbow Room has been from the faith community. Both of our Rainbow Room locations exist in community churches. When we got a generous grant from the Pennsylvania Department of Education to sustain and expand our services, it was synagogues, churches, faith settings that reached out and said, please open it in our setting. Like, this is who we are, this is who we represent. So I also really want to point that out, that, it's incredibly insulting to most people of faith that anyone would use religion as an excuse for their bigotry. But I just seeing the actual shelves in my kids' classroom get emptied was really devastating. And teachers saying, usually I leave my books in my classroom over the summer. I took everything out of my classroom because I don't know what is going to happen over the summer when I'm not there. So there's a lot of fear and a lot of mistrust. And then when teachers do ask a question or push back or say, I don't actually think that policy around affirming pronouns is healthy, then they actually feel that they get punished. And there are some classrooms that literally have blank walls where posters and signs have come down. And that is not a vibrant learning environment. So it feels very, very real here in our community.
And there's also one quick thing I just want to add is that, especially at the school board level, the policies we see introduced, we see the same policies pop up in school board after school board, right? So it's not like a spontaneous idea that folks had and sort of genuine concern, right? We see that it's, if you run the bills through like a plagiarism checker or whatever, right, you'll see that it's the same bill that was introduced in Texas by the same folks who were involved, right? And one school board will copy another school board's policy. It's always there's a list of books that the other side has sort of promulgated, and those same books will show up over and over and over again. So we see a lot of repeating, a lot of sort of form letter style policies that gets that sort of spread across the Commonwealth.
Thank you for that add-on. And Marlene, thank you for also spreading the joy in this work too. Meaning talking about all the people that have reached out to express, their support as well. So there is that's the sweet of the bittersweet part of this work.
Can I just say one more thing about that? Like,
please.
Frankly, if there's some like opposition people listening to this later, it's not working, and you are gaining us so much more support and love and educating and empowering young people and parents. The amount of engagement that we have, and I just have people even on this call sending me little messages like, our entire group just issued an endorsement of you, so thank you. I lost the name of it, but the United Methodist Church Congregation, I'm probably using the wrong name, of Pennsylvania. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Even the donations that we have received, like there's a tattoo parlor that just raised over $6,000 for us to hire young people to be part of our staff, and give them job opportunities and support. And so, we're and last night we had an open mic night for the Rainbow Room with, over 100 people from the community, and singing and poetry and celebration. And I mean, these kids are changing the world, and they are beautiful and they are dynamic, and we are so incredibly lucky to share this moment in time with them. And that really is an important part of what is happening right now in our country and in our community. So thanks for uplifting the joy, Sarah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. We'll take some questions. We've got some great questions coming through, but please continue to bring them through on the Q&A function at the bottom. I'm going to move us along to, how we've mentioned we cannot do this work alone, right? It's not done in a silo. We recognize we can't do it all. So I'd love to hear from folks around the table on how we work in coalition. How do we work with others? And maybe let's actually start with you, Marlene. How have students and families organized around these issues?
Yeah, so much amazing, innovative stuff is going on. And I really want to also uplift the coalitions that have happened both nationally and locally, like the collaboration that happens between the NAACP chapter of Bucks County and NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Bucks County, and A Woman's Place and the Network of Victim Assistance, and like these organizations that often, we will do our work in our silos and advocate and fundraise, but to see how people are showing up for one another. Also, there's a couple really incredibly active youth-led activist groups that are just totally inspiring, and I continue to learn so much from them. So here in Central Bucks, for example, we have one called, well, it's actually Bucks County-wide, called Youth for Unity, and it's the number 4. So if you look them up on socials, it's Youth for Unity. And they co-sponsored the queer artistry open mic event that we had last night. And they do a lot of fundraising and empowerment and education in the community. A couple of the students are having a concert on Monday at the county courthouse under the big pride flag. And there's another group called the Bucks Liberation Coalition. Again, all student run. They will pull kids in from like clubs at school, but also just kids who are out of school, but still active in the area. So that partnership and just seeing the youth do that, which is, by the way, just totally free of adults' involvement. Like they're doing it on their own. I sort of say, like, I might plug the microphone in on occasion, both metaphorically or literally, like I did last night, but then the kids are at the mic, like it's their voice, it's their truth. And they're also holding us accountable. They are constantly giving information to, adult-led organizations of what works and what's really happening here. What's devastating is when they do that, for example, at school board meetings, month after month after month, actually speak about what happened to them that day at school or that week, and get ignored or told that's not true, or told, or just basically told, I hear you, and I'm not going to do anything to support you. So that's, another thing that we know, and not to get too like partisan, because I'm also part of a 501c3 that does not endorse candidates. But just looking at the results from the May primaries here in Bucks County was really dramatic to see that this is not actually a partisan issue. There were people definitely crossing the, political aisle to support candidates who speak up for civil rights and human rights. And I think that's a hopeful sign. I think it also sends panic into the, far right extremists, which is what they're, even looking at the list of topics that they're covering today at their Moms for Liberty convention is very telling of the, the fear that they're experiencing. But I often say, like, listen to the kids or just get out of their way, because they're gonna lead and stand up for their rights and for one another. I mean, there's a lot of allies, a lot of, cis and straight allies that are leading the fight for LGBTQ equality and equity. I could talk a lot about this, so I'm going to be quiet.
Anybody else want to talk about that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of reiterate that, we work in coalition with other organizations, both legal service providers and advocacy organizations, as well as some of the parental and community groups. We understand that, the work's not done in a silo and we can't do it all. So collaboration is always key. And yeah.
Thank you. So we've been inspired, right? We've been inspired to act. I guess I should speak for myself. I've been inspired to act, but hopefully some of our participants have as well. So what is it that we can do? What are ways in which our supporters and the folks in this space can get involved in their communities?
Well, I also want to uplift another organization that I think is a really good model for folks, which is the acronym is AFI. It's the Advocates for Inclusive Education. And it's a local grassroots started by a, recently retired teacher and a Central Bucks mom. And that little mighty organization is doing so many positive things. And the website, I think, is super helpful for other communities. If you just want to see like what on a very local level with no budget can folks do to educate their community, to get folks to show up at school board meetings, to pay attention to candidates, to really inquire where they stand on things. Also finding out like, where are the kids speaking, struggling, striving, like how is this impacting students, and to really offer them a voice and find the organizations that do offer a voice and support them. I think that's incredibly important. And then, yeah, so I'll just say that for now.
Yeah, I think I'll take a second to thank our members that are on the call. I mean, we rely so much on members and volunteers letting us know what's happening on the ground. So if you see in your local school district that these anti-inclusive education efforts are being introduced, please fill out an intake form that goes directly to our legal department and gets filtered to the folks that need to see it. Like Marlene said, attending school board meetings is super key. I encourage folks to check out the Advocates for Inclusive Education website. Such a great model to look up what students did in Central York. Also a great model of student activism. Ultimately, the solution to these issues isn't in the state house, right? It isn't necessarily a lawsuit. A lot of it's about winning elections, winning school board elections, right? Because school boards have a lot of the power individually. So although we as an organization don't endorse candidates, we can talk about the importance of these positions and educate folks on the power that school boards have, which is something we work on. So if you are inspired to action, I encourage you to, one, get connected with an organization that's working on these issues, right? Feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in getting involved. Two, I'd recommend attending school board meetings or familiarizing yourself with the school board and what they're doing. And three, I would recommend running for school board, right? It's a tough job, especially in these moments, right? But we need folks that will support inclusive education to be in those seats, because we've seen, for example, in Central Bucks, right? Like Marlene said, there's students, there's faculty, there's alumni, right? That come up meeting after meeting and tell their stories and share their experiences, right? But when the school board is filled with people who aren't interested in hearing those stories, they continue to pass these policies that harm the most marginalized students, right? So ultimately, it's about running for office and people who believe in inclusive education holding those seats and being able to sort of stem the tide of these attacks that we're seeing.
And I guess maybe I'm less ambitious than Alex. I wasn't going to recommend running for school board, but that's a great idea. But if you're not up for that, then vote. I mean, that's the most important thing. I mean, hopefully people know that odd years, or when school board elections happen in Pennsylvania, and this is an odd year. So, find out what's going on in your school board, find out who's running, find out how many seats are open, learn about the candidates and what they stand for, and go and vote in November.
And I'll just add the very real world experience of, we have students that show up and speak at school board meetings, and some of them get verbally assaulted on their way out of the building as they're getting back in their car. So, just really paying attention to what's happening on the ground and not just showing up, but kind of keeping your eyes on the horizon and on the scene to, and offer, don't assume that someone wants an escort, but to offer, is there something that you need or want that I can provide? What are you struggling with right now? What support or help do you need? We have so many resources within our communities and families and skills and things that we have access to that, whether it's you've got a good sound system or, that you can lend or, you can financially support an initiative that's happening, certainly supporting, candidates that align with your values is really important. Again, unless you're going to want to run, which is, please don't shy away from that too much, because it's really important. We have people representing, human rights and civil rights. So, and not, and also take care of yourself. Rest is really, 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 really important. So resting and finding like amazing people. And I know this sounds cheesy, but like Rich and Alex, who I've gotten to work with, and, that just make me feel hopeful when I show up to work and get to see these faces in the work that we do. And yours too, Sarah, but your face is new to me. So, I mean, it's really important. Like there's so much joy. I have made so many incredible friends in this, horrific environment that I'm sometimes in. And then working for a place like Planned Parenthood, where everyone shows up with so much, and the ACLU, for you all, that people are so committed to this. It's just, it really matters to rest and support one another and find joy in the struggle.
Yeah, and I think to hop
Here.
back in, sorry, Sarah, I cut you off. I mean, Marlene just reminded me, right? Organizing is a sort of wonderful thing where whatever skill you have, whatever you like to do, there's probably a way to do that and support the causes you care about, right? So, I mean, if you have a yard, right, maybe you put up one of those free library boxes, right, that has banned books, or if you have space hosting an event, if you can cook, right? These school board meetings are on weeknights, right? They sometimes last a really long time. Maybe you gather your friends together, right? And if some person can make meals for folks when they get out of the meetings, right? That often will run all night. That's helpful, right? It's important to, whatever you like to do, how can that be, or whatever you have the capability to do, how can that be utilized for this? And again, like Marlene mentioned, how to bring joy and care and community into the work. That's really important to be able to sustain these fights. And as much as there's a lot of sort of horrific events and rhetoric, there's a lot of joy and community to be had in organizing for these ideals that we care about, right? And it's sort of incumbent on us to be able to sustain these efforts because they're important, right? This isn't a political fight to us, right? This is about the lives and livelihood of ourselves and the people we care about and our family members and our community members. So all I have to say, find what it is you like to do that you already do, and how can that be purposed? How can you contribute that to support the people who are already working on this, or how you can get involved yourself in these efforts?
Wonderful. Thank you for all that. We'll take a couple of questions. There was one I was interested to throw out here. I see Marlene addressed it a little bit in the chat, but maybe I'll just kind of throw it out there, because I'm also just kind of personally interested. I referenced growing up in Middle America, that Middle America was Iowa, and this last legislation period, there was a potential for the threat of reversing same-sex marriage. It didn't make it anywhere, but I guess the question from an audience member is, do you feel there is a viable movement in this country to have the right to same-sex marriage reversed? He referenced his husband and him have been married since 2014, and they are concerned about some of the rhetoric. Understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very real concern, right? And I think just today, the news we got from the Supreme Court, right? It seems like almost every week we get some type of bad news, right? And we know that the rights we may have taken for granted, right, aren't necessarily always going to be there. So and Rich, I don't know if you can speak more to the legal aspects of it, but I know it's one of those things where the fear is real, right? And that's part of the impetus and motivation for us as an organization, and I know for folks on the call to keep organizing and to keep fighting back to protect our civil liberties.
Yeah, I think the fear is absolutely real, but I've not heard of any kind of concrete kind of real threat that is kind of imminent, but I really don't know. And if people were wondering what Alex was referring to today, the Supreme Court today said that colleges and universities cannot consider race as a factor in admissions. So basically no affirmative action. At least I assume that's what you're talking about, Alex.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm looking at the time. We'll take one more. Let's see. How about, I guess we can, what bills have been introduced in PA? Can we name the bills that we're keeping an eye on?
The augment bill just got reintroduced. I don't have the other two at the tip of my fingers, but I can look those up and get those to the questioner. So I don't know if they're gonna drop their email.
And can I just respond to one of the other questions briefly, Sarah?
Please.
There's
Yes.
a question about Hillsdale College and how they become involved in local education. I did provide a link to a local group here in the Penridge School District, which is just neighboring to me in Bucks County, that is trying to track this and hold them accountable. And I think it is really important to know that there's groups like Hillsdale College and the Independence Law Center and the Pennsylvania Family Institute and Moms for Liberty. Like, there is a network, and here they've just rebranded themselves Protect Bucks here in Bucks County. These groups there's a lot of groups that are usually small in number, but crossover and are, loud and organized, and some of them very well funded, that are actively organizing against so much of what we stand for here around civil rights and human rights, and certainly LGBTQ existence, the very existence, our very existence. So and finding that out and exposing that has also been an effective and important action locally, like actually making sure that people know, hey, a Christian nationalist anti-LGBTQ group has written some of and informed and been secretly informing some of our school board members for policy, about books and about pride flags. And that's, I mean, not only is some of that action likely illegal, but it's really alarming to a lot of people. And I think understanding that in groups like Hillsdale College and how they have become involved is really important. So I know you asked how have they become involved, and I'm just answering by saying they're involved and offering a resource there. But AFI, again, I know the website is in the Q&A, and also Ridge Network in Penridge are a couple good, and again, these are just local parents. These are not like paid, these are just folks that decided, okay, I'm going to start getting some information out there and trying to educate people about what's going on, and working together with students. So thanks.
No, thank you. And thank you, Alex and Rich and everybody in the space who's shown up today to learn. I want to give an extra huge thanks to my colleague, Jackie Rosen, behind the scenes, who's keeping us all organized and running the tech and did a lot of work getting us ready for today. you know, if you enjoyed today's discussion, as I mentioned earlier, I am the director of philanthropy, so I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't at least ask for you to consider a gift. You can visit aclupa.org/donate to send in a donation. And please do check out all the ways in which you can get involved, because it all counts, right? With that, I'm a little sad for our time to wrap up, but I've hit my hour max on Zoom, so it's time to say goodbye. So thank you again, everybody, for your work, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Sarah, Rich, Alex, Jackie.
Yes, bye.